Good morning, everyone, and welcome back. Thanks again for your attendance yesterday, for your attendance today, for your engagement. We very much appreciate it. We had some really fascinating discussions yesterday. We're in store for several more, so looking forward to it. And to help tee up some of those issues for us, while she's getting settled, I'll introduce her. I would like to invite Dr. Victoria Saporta, the Executive Director of the Prudential Policy in the Bank of England and the Prudential Regulatory Authority, PRA, and Chair of the IAIS Executive Committee to deliver today's keynote. Her keynote's entitled Common Risk, the Importance of Supervisory Cooperation and Collaboration. And just to tell you a little bit about Vicki, she's held a number of positions in prudential policy, financial stability, and monetary analysis in a career spanning over 25 years at the Bank of England. Vicki was at the heart of the macro-prudential and micro-prudential policy reforms undertaken by the bank after the global financial crisis and has been leading the prudential policy work of the PRA since 2016. She holds a PhD in economics, a Master of Philosophy and Finance from the University of Cambridge, and a Bachelor in Science in Mathematical Economics and Econometrics from the London School of Economics. Vicki is all of those things and has accomplished all of that. But I'm often reminded, through her role at the IAIS, she is also an expert herder of cats. And when I thought of that phrase, I was reminded of a similar phrase that was shared with me by a friend and colleague at the IAIS, Manuela. Manuela said that in Germany they say einen Sack Flur hüten, which means literally translated, herding a full bag of fleas. I agree with Manuela, that is definitely worse than herding cats, but it is Vicki's charge and she does it well. And she possesses these talents. So we're looking forward to your comments, Vicki. This time, the floor isn't virtual, so I will turn the actual floor over to you. Please welcome Vicki Saporta.
Well, thank you, Gary. And let me start by saying how nice it is to be in person here and being able to address the NAIC International Forum, actually not virtually, but having contact and actually seeing people's reactions and seeing so many professional colleagues that I have not seen for a long time. So thank you very much to the NAIC for inviting me, and I'm delighted to be back here in the US for the first time since 2019 to have in-person discussions with colleagues. Now, what I want to talk about is about the importance of supervisory cooperation and collaboration in the current environment. Now, it's clear that we are living in a world of repeated and rather strange and unusual shocks. Who would have expected the pandemic before it occurred? And there have been decades since we had two independent countries at war in Europe. Who would have expected that either? We are living in challenging times with a rapidly changing risk landscape for the insurance sector, who gets affected by these events. When I became chair of the IAIS back in 2015, we're very much focused on finalizing our policy response to the global financial crisis of 2008, which is one of these other shocks, although arguably it's one of the ones that we should have expected. The crucial milestones reached in 2019 with the adoption of COMFRAME and the holistic framework have served us particularly well in recent years. These global supervisory frameworks that we have put together since the crisis have simultaneously allowed us to, firstly, respond more effectively as a community of supervisors to these unprecedented global challenges, And secondly, to be more forward-looking in addressing emerging and accelerating risks and opportunities, including those from increased digitalization and climate change, just to name a few major global trends. 7 years on, I'm proud to say that we have supported our members through a global pandemic and continue to support them as new challenges arise, including now with analyzing the impact on the global economy of the war in Ukraine as it unfolds. Throughout these crises, IAIS members have worked together effectively and with commitment, supported by the work we undertook following the global financial crisis to address the weaknesses we found. This working together through these new supervisory frameworks, through these new processes that we put together in response to the global financial crisis, have created bonds in our international supervisory community, and I feel they have continued to strengthen. And more recently, we use them, both our bonds and the analysis and the tools that we have built in a number of areas. First, we were able to quickly analyze the direct impact on the global insurance sector arising from the war in Ukraine. While certain lines of business, such as aviation in particular, are materially affected because of the operational issues with implementation of the sanctions against Russia and Belarus, at a general level, there is limited direct underwriting exposure linked to low insurance penetration rates in Russia and Ukraine. However, there are macro risks out there which will affect our sector. These had already started to emerge in response to the pandemic, that is before the Russia-Ukraine war, and included inflationary pressures not seen in decades. There are traders out there that have never seen inflation going up above 5% in their lifetime. And they have been driven in part by supply chain shortages, which then caused the prices of certain input goods to rise, but also because of resurgent demand when lockdowns were removed. So it's clear that the war in Russia and Ukraine is accelerating these trends, affecting particular jurisdictions, particularly in terms of commodity and food prices. And international organizations such as the BIS have warned that inflationary pressures will not ease soon, as many of the driving forces remain in place and new ones are emerging. Market and credit risks. We observe a market rise in corporate and sovereign yields following a prolonged period of low rates that have put pressure on insurance business models. Credit risks such as large-scale corporate defaults or downgrades are not yet materializing, thank God. However, there is uncertainty going forward, for example, whether the pace of monetary policy tightening that we're seeing in a number of jurisdictions, including, of course, the US, could lead to a snapback in inflation expectations and a disorderly adjustment in financial markets, and we have seen some adjustment already. Cyber. It's clear that we must be very alert to cyber risks, especially given the increased extent to which some state actors are using these tools. This, of course, is relevant to insurers both from an operational risk and cyber underwriting perspective. This places a heightened responsibility on us supervisors to ensure that the firms we supervise have proper cyber resilience plans in place, and that where they underwrite these risks, they do so in a manner in which the risks are well understood and managed. And clearly recent developments, again with the war, have accelerated the trend of, that came through digitalization about the need for greater cyber resilience. Now, having said that, the insurance sector has to date been resilient in aggregate. That said, we are not complacent, and we're monitoring how the sector would respond to the deterioration in the global economic outlook that will place further pressure on both the asset and liability sides of insurance balance sheets in a differential way depending on the business model of particular insurance companies. We are committed to continue to actively monitor these developments, in particular through the IAIS's annual Global Monitoring Exercise, or the GME, which we launched in 2019, which we agreed in 2019 and launched in 2020, which provides an invaluable tool for risk assessment and global supervisory coordination, central to our mission of contributing to global financial stability. I mentioned earlier that ComFrame and the holistic framework for the assessment and mitigation of systemic risk have proven particularly useful during the pandemic crisis and now as we're looking at the deterioration in the global economic outlook. The standards agreed in 2019 also set out supervisory requirements for a forward-looking analysis of risks on aspects such as macro-pru supervision and liquidity risk management. In addition to developing supervisory standards and guidance, we have been also focused on the comprehensive and consistent implementation of these frameworks across the world as a key element of embedding an effective forward-looking global approach to supervising risks in the sector. So in that context, the implementation context, last year we published a baseline assessment of the implementation of the holistic framework. The results showed overall high levels of observance in the 26 participating jurisdictions. So it looks as good progress has been made. Work is now well underway in finalizing our more intensive targeted jurisdictional assessments of implementation in 10 jurisdictions, 10 jurisdictions that have large IAIGs, on which we will report to the Financial Stability Board later this year. As we look to the decision that will be taken by the Financial Stability Board on the future of the annual identification of global systemically important insurers, we are in a good position so far to set out its benefits. And this is, as I said, because we've used it already and it has proved useful and through this period, and also because of so far the good levels of observance we see on the supervisory standards across the jurisdictions. To this end, and in order to give more information to the FSB about how well this framework, the holistic framework, is operating, we are going to hold a stakeholder workshop open to the public in mid-July, which will seek to gather feedback on the framework. So this is a bit of a shameless sort of marketing of that stakeholder workshop. But given that I've got the podium, please, could you encourage you to join us? It is important because we are going to use this feedback as part of going back to the FSB that ultimately are the decision maker on the future of the annual identification of global systemically important insurers. On ICS, the COVID-19 crisis also highlighted the relevance of a global group capital standard to provide a common language for global solvency discussions to effectively monitor how solvency ratios have been behaving across the different jurisdictions. It is an insurance capital standard that provides a common language for group solvency is even more important in a global stress for the insurance sector and makes communication across supervisors of international groups much easier. Despite the operational challenges of the pandemic, delivery of the ICS remains on track with good engagement with those groups, volunteer groups taking part in the process, to which many thanks, who through their participation have the opportunity to help shape this global standard, because we are learning from the participation of those groups, and the standard is not yet final. Of course, we plan to consult next year. Last year, we also had the first ICS discussions amongst group-wide supervisors in supervisory colleges, which provided useful input and feedback to further enhance the ICS. At the same time, we are making good progress on the development of draft criteria that will be used to assess by the end of the monitoring period whether the aggregation method being developed by the US provides comparable outcomes to the ICS. I know that some colleagues in the IAIS have expressed frustration that we are not further away and we haven't been able to produce a consultation paper for stakeholder feedback on criteria yet. But I can just assure you that all parties that are involved, which are basically the supervisors of the major IRGs, are committed to move forward in a very collaborative manner on this. I chair the ICS Task Force that is having a lot of discussions, and I can tell you personally that through the years, since the landmark agreement that we made in Abu Dhabi, which linked the ICS development to the comparability assessment, there is a lot of greater understanding among supervisors about the differences of global supervisory systems that exist. And it's through this process of comparability that we are learning more about our own systems, and we are learning more about how things could be comparable. Now, it is a challenging exercise, and I don't want to suggest that it's all rainbows and unicorns, because, and the reason that it is challenging is precisely what I just said. It's because the ICS, being a market-adjusted valuation group consolidated standard, is by design different than the aggregation method, which is a building block approach aggregation standard, which particularly for companies that have long-term liabilities is highly likely to respond in very different ways at any particular point in time. Now, these points were not necessarily accepted back in 2018. They are accepted now, and there's much, much more willingness around the table to look at the differences and come up with an equivalence process that will be technical, robust, but will accept differences between the design and fundamental and conceptual differences between the ICS and the aggregation method. So we are, in my view, we're very close to issue a consultation paper. I hope I don't jinx it by saying it here, given that it's Friday the 13th and all that. I'm not, of course, at all superstitious, but if there is a willingness and a belief in the value of international collaboration and from learning from each other and understanding each other's systems across supervisors that regulate international groups, we should be able to get agreement. Let me now say talk about something else. And this is, go back to my original theme, which is about key risks and trends impacting the insurance sector. By way of example, I will briefly touch on the issues of climate change and cyber risk, as well as the increasing imperative to coordinate with other global bodies and standard setters in recognition of the fact that these global trends are also cross-sectoral in nature. Now, our work on climate change is moving forward quickly. The amount of consensus that exists amongst our supervisors about the importance of this work is unprecedented, a completely different picture than that existed a few years ago, markedly different. So we are all seized by the importance of tackling the risks that are already emerging. The recent reports, of course, as a way of context, published by the IPCC, are really sobering and remind us of the need for action, not at some stage in the future, but now, and in particular of the increased risks that delayed actions will pose for the insurance sector. In March, the IAIS Exco agreed on 3 areas of work on climate change. First, we did some analysis about whether there were any gaps on the insurance core principles that we needed to fill to try to address climate change issues. And the answer was that the ICPs are sufficiently broad to cover climate risks. However, we do need to make a limited number of changes to ICP guidance and develop supporting material for our supervisory communities to make even more explicit that insurance supervisors should be requiring insurers to incorporate climate-related risks into their day-to-day operations, including in the governance, ERM, and disclosures. So when there are peer reviews, when the IMF comes to do FSAPs, all of that is crystal clear. Second, work is focusing on supporting members to address practical challenges within the emerging field of climate scenario analysis. This is kind of big. A number of jurisdictions are already asking all their companies to do climate scenario analysis. This includes my jurisdiction, which issued expectations on that front back in 2019. But it's becoming much more common. So I'm grateful to trade associations and insurers for the input we have already received at workshops we have organized to try to understand what works and what's happening in scenario analysis. At a later stage, we will consider whether further work needs to be undertaken to develop supporting material on these issues, which would, of course, be subject to public consultation. Third, we have added climate data elements to the GME of this year. These elements will become a regular feature of our annual assessment of insurance sector risks. Early next year, we will also consider whether to collect climate data directly from individual insurers. We have already asked trade associations to identify data elements they think would be critical to understand climate risks, so I really appreciate and look forward to their input. Moving to cyber, which I have already touched upon, this is again another risk which is global in nature, and we are dedicating further resources to it. This year, we're going to issue a special topic of our annual Global Insurance Market Report on cyber risk, including how cyber risk underwriting activities of insurers could mitigate or amplify potential financial stability risks. Additionally, we are developing an issues paper on operational resilience in the insurance sector, specifically on supervisory considerations with respect to risks associated with IT third-party outsourcing, which is another trend, including to the cloud, of course, and insurance sector cyber resilience more broadly. The paper will also consider lessons from COVID-19 on ensuring business continuity over an extended period. Lastly, we recognize, I've been talking a lot about the fact that the nature of the problems that we have to face are becoming increasingly global, so requiring even more so than before global cooperation. But also they're becoming much more cross-sectoral, that is, they don't only apply to our sector, the insurance sector. This is why we at the IAIS are an active participant and a vocal participant in cross-sectoral forums, such as the Financial Stability Board, on these topics. And we try to build on cross-sectoral learnings where we can, while also contributing and shaping the insurance sector's specific perspectives. That's all I had to say of substance. Let me conclude that there will continue to be emerging risks for the sector. And we're already sort of global macro outlook has deteriorated, and there could well be shocks that we have never yet imagined. Given that, the trust and tools that we have built as an international supervisory community now are even more important than ever before in making us, making global supervisory coordination a central piece of what it means to supervise internationally active groups. So, with that remark, I understand I wasn't unfortunately here yesterday, but I understand that President Cameron yesterday talked about the importance of collaboration and cooperation and learning from each other. And I really can't agree more. This has become so crucial given the nature of the shocks that we are facing. And if I can end with a note of shameless marketing again, second shameless marketing. It is quite important, and I'm sure a lot of you have felt it in this forum, to build social capital and improve these links amongst ourselves through not only meeting each other remotely over Zoom or Teams or WebEx, but also meeting in person on occasion. And that opportunity will present itself in June when we have the first in-person global seminar in over 2 years in Dubrovnik in Croatia from 16 to 17 June. Registration closes in the coming week, so I hope to see many of you there as well, so we can continue our discussions, and I look forward to that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vicki. Always thoughtful remarks. We appreciate your time and your travel. It is really nice to see you in person. While I have you on stage, I would like to take an opportunity to take care of some Massachusetts and IAIS business. I am pleased to announce that the state of Massachusetts will become a signatory to the IAIS MMOU, which is a global framework for cooperation and information exchange among insurance supervisors. To become a signatory of the IAIS MMOU, applicants undergo a rigorous assessment of their confidentiality regimes conducted by an independent team of IAIS members. And I would just like to pause there and thank the independent IAIS members and the staff of the Division of Insurance in Massachusetts for their work on this. The MMOU strengthens insurance supervisors' ability to work cooperatively, and in particular to monitor large cross-border insurers. IAIS MMOU signatories currently represent 3/4 of the global gross written premiums. So with that, I'm happy to sign and make Massachusetts the 21st state becoming an IAIS MMOU signatory. Thank you again, Vicki.